Ludek, Matyska, to take on the stage. Professor Matyska is a full professor at the University of Urbano, Czech Republic, and director of Center for Scientific Cloud at Matyska University. He is also senior researcher at CESNET, the SEC, NLEN, and NGI. Currently, he is chair of the project management board of the EGI Inspire project, and he's also involved in the TAIN project. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Good morning to everybody. Yeah, it's back again. I will have a presentation which relates to the execution of the project Chain, which was already introduced here on the first day of the conference by the coordinator, Professor Federico Ruggieri. So here is just a very brief reminder what the Chain project is. It is a project which is trying globally to look at the situation of the infrastructures with the emphasis on the grid, which means distributed computing infrastructures. Its main objectives are to define a strategy and a model for external collaboration between other regions and Europe, and to validate this model through working with different regions and explore and propose concrete steps forward for the different regions, how to really set up, establish and collaborate globally at the infrastructure level. It has 5 work packages. It started on the 1st December of 2010 and currently is in fact near the end of its first year. The Chain project in fact is trying to look globally at the situation in the whole world. So here is just a simple picture of what are the individual projects which deal with individual regions or sub-regions or countries that the Chain project is somehow trying to consolidate over one common view. So that's the coordination and harmonization of advanced infrastructures. So what I will present here is in fact a result of some part of the work within the Chain during the first year, and this is specifically the things which relate to the understanding of the current state of the art within the whole globe, and also the first recommendation towards the sustainable organizational model and interoperational operational model for distributed infrastructure around the world. So the first project objective was to define a strategy and a model for external collaboration. And to do this, we started with a regional and country level questionnaire, which we used to gather the information about what the individual countries and regions have at this moment, and what also they see as the major obstacles or ways forward for their individual regions. So the results are in fact presented in 2 specific deliverables. The questionnaire itself is described in 1, and then the results are in 2, which are the specificities of various regional infrastructures, and this will be the major focus of this talk. And the second is interoperability and interoperation guidelines, where I will show the first recommendations which came after this analysis. So now I will show several tables or pictures which represent the results of the questionnaire and which will help us to give an overview and impression how the situation really looks like to the whole world. So if you look at the individual infrastructures as they were presented in the global picture, we see that there are in fact few, which is unfortunate, just few different approaches towards establishing the distributed computing infrastructure, like a grid, which is UMD, which is used by EGI, and which is also used by many regions, including the African one. Then we have 3 other, we are omitting the developed countries, Japan and US, because they will be adding 2 more lines onto this table. So we see that China, India, and to some extent Brazil are using a different system, but otherwise majority regions, it doesn't mean majority of users, but majority regions is using the same Europe conceived middleware system. If you look at the board from these some quantitative numbers, we see on the side and CPU cores the very huge differences between the regions, with Asia Pacific and China having the most power around the underdeveloped regions, and we see that Africa is not situated bad in this picture. Here is a storage capacity where we see the huge things available in Asia Pacific and China, and this somehow diminishes the contribution of all the other countries, including, for example, India. Number of users, again, we see that the Asia Pacific and China are really much more advanced than the rest of the world. And now we have some other view which goes through the applications. What kind of things are used through the regions for which the grids are really deployed. And here we see as a scattered picture, which in fact gives us the feeling that there are some application areas or research communities which are shared among all the regions. And we will see how this is then transposed into some of the recommendations, because this in fact can help us to find a common understanding and common view on infrastructures, because we have a common use and people who are trying to work in the same scientific area. The core services, this relates more again to what is available within individual grid infrastructures, and here we see that the coverage is rather even, and even in countries where the primary middleware is different from the one which is used in Europe, we still see that the services are more or less the same. The only exception is India. The Arab states, you usually have seen just empty blank items, because they are just at the beginning of the process, but everywhere where these things are already deployed, we see that they are there, as I say, with the exception of India, which uses a really different approach, and so it's not so easy to map what they have as a services, as a core services, to what is available elsewhere. The middleware, this is just a more detailed picture which I gave at the beginning, or more detailed table, where we see again that the GLI is in fact available in most of the countries. Then we will see that China deploys several other middlewares, and in fact the GLI is by far not the most important middleware system for China at this moment. And otherwise we see that we can find a reasonable common ground with the European middleware there. Another thing which is interesting is the view for understanding of the global situation is the trust and the way how individual users and researchers are really authenticated towards this. And for this I give here a picture about certification authorities, where we see that this is from IGPS, the organization which in fact takes care of certifying certification authorities, so that the certificates issued by one are accepted in other countries. And we see that globally the situation is rather positive and encouraging, with unfortunate exception of Africa, where we see just very few countries with already certified certification authorities. So this also gives us within the project kind of a thing which we have to focus on with the recommendation which we are trying to produce. And similar picture for identity federations, currently a new and different approach to identify individual users, where naturally the situation is less developed than with the certification authorities. And again, we see that here, unfortunately, the Africa is still lagging behind. Okay, this is the official picture from from Terena, which provides all this information. So this is the results of the questionnaire to give you some impression how the differences between the individual regions really looks like. Based on these, the project tried to develop, to analyze them and try to develop some of the recommendations. And for this I will give the results, just a subset of the result, for 3 work regions, which somehow are related, and actually the last one which I will present is the African. There is Latin America. If you look at the situation in Latin America, we see that it is to much extent the EGI-related infrastructure with 2 regional operation centers, which is something which is not completely in line with what EGI expects, but it's fine. And the major thing is that because it's based on the same middleware, the interoperations, the way that the jobs and data can flow, is not difficult to set up, to solve here. However, at organizational level, we already come with several recommendations, which also relate to projects which run, European co-funded project, which run within the Latin America area. So there is one recommendation that the situation, which is unfortunately still not completely homogenized within Latin America, will be put forward into the Red Clara infrastructure, so it will really be homogenized. That there is another area where the individual countries within Latin America should focus on fostering financial support of the NRENs, because NRENs are much more developed than the distributed infrastructure say, institutions within the Latin America regions. And use sub-region, because there are differences within Latin America, and individual sub-regions or countries have a very different maturity there. So to use this knowledge, which is available in some of these sub-regions, to transfer expertise from most advanced and active countries, and use task force mechanism for training and user support, which means to really make sure that the know-how is spread evenly within Latin America, while it's in fact that there is already available know-how in this region.
2 minutes.
Yeah, it's fine. The Middle East and Gulf, which is the north part of the Africa, why I selected it as the second example. Here we see that although there was already a support from Europe for the Mediterranean countries, the situation is improving recently with the setup of ASREN, Arab State-Run Establishment, and with the Africa ROC, which goes for the sub-Saharan, but covers also these countries. So there is a very limited hardware available still and very limited expertise. So the recommendations are different, that there must be focus on providing the identity federations and certification authorities into this region. We had seen it in the pictures, in the 2 last pictures, that there is a very, very bad coverage in this region. And the ASREN infrastructure should support research communities in Arab countries and make available services at regional level, which means that we hope and we recommend that the newly established ASREN initiative can help in this region to really move forward. And the last, which I would like to present, the region, is naturally the one we are in, which is the sub-Saharan Africa, where we see, from the point of view of the chain project, a very heterogeneous landscape with huge differences between regions. We see South Africa on one level and some of the Central African countries as the other extreme, and naturally as the result is varying degree of service deployment. So the recommendations for this, there are much more of them within the mentioned deliverable D2.2, but to just emphasize 2 of them, the SANREN and ASENRENs should develop national network operation centers and take care of trust. We had seen that Africa still needs to set up the infrastructure for the authentication and then eventually the authorization. So the trust is very important to set up here. The UbuntuNet Alliance should play a key role in coordinating actions approaching Africa Research Institute via alliance partners. In fact, we had seen several times during the last 2 days that this was proposed also here by different presenters. So this is, the finding is in line with what we had seen during this conference. It also, the next step that the UbuntuNet Alliance is to coordinate closely with the Africa ROC training of new experts. Because there was a help from the chain project to establish the Africa ROC, Regional Operations Center, and we suggest that this should go together and eventually be taken over by the UbuntuNet Alliance for the further responsibility. And again, the SAGRID to coordinate operations and encourage integration of new resources based on common middleware where it is appropriate and possible. So if you look at the conclusions, there is just one slide. The Interoperations, what we found out as a result of all this analysis, that what we call the EGI-centric view doesn't fit all the regions and countries. The EGI-centric view means that the regions adopt the middleware and the organizational structure as it is currently done within Europe. But we see, for example, in China and India, that they develop their own infrastructure independently. So instead of returning to the, or dismissing what they did and taking to European solution, we need to find a different interoperability model. So the recommendations here are to go into the implementation of a standard set of functionalities and core services. That's why we presented the core services there. And we had seen already that the set of core services spans over most of the middleware, regardless of the origin of the development. So just follow this. Then integrate the ticketing systems, set up inter-infrastructure monitoring framework. The chain project suggests that the Nagios is used to really do the global monitoring of these infrastructures. And use, the last one is very important, use intercontinental virtual research communities. There are the communities which are presented at different regions doing the same research, research in the same scientific area, to push forward the inter-regional infrastructure collaboration. So instead of doing it from the technology point of view, from the infrastructure themselves, to really focus on users, and users who are present in different regions to come to a common solution. And also to use science gateways as an easy-to-use entry point to which is a portal-based entry point into the grid infrastructure, hiding the complexity. So the conclusions, the chain project collected up-to-date information about state of infrastructures and especially grids in the global view. Based on the analysis of this data, we set up a long list of recommendations, some of them general, like the interoperations, some of them focused to individual regions, and the recommendations target policy, technology, as well as individual regions. The middleware interoperability can be addressed with a reasonable effort. This is one of the interesting and important findings. With a reasonable effort, with the exception of China and India, where more work is needed because the infrastructure is based on a different software, on different framework. And naturally, the interoperation field will need more development, and there is the role of VRCs to do this. And the last slide, the chain project is looking to the short-term organizational model, which we already deployed, for example, here in Africa, helping to set up the Africa ROC, and also repeating it in China. We're setting up the China ROC to make sure that there is compatible infrastructure, compatible with the European one, compatible infrastructure available in these regions. But for long-term solutions, especially to cover the regions with their own infrastructure already developed, to look forward new type of agreement between Europe, between EGI and the other infrastructures. And this new agreement should also include the technicalities of how eventually data and work, jobs can be transmitted between the infrastructures. And another recommendation which came up as a parallel that we have to also include in our proposal, in the next proposal, which we are working on now, to include new technology development, because as we had seen, we focused on the, what we can call a standard middleware stuff, but now we see a much more widespread use of virtualization, cloud technology, and identity federation are already included, to make sure that these, in fact, creating even more complex situation from one point of view, but eventually they can help us to set up some more appropriate vision which will cover the different requirements from different research communities and the aim to have a common infrastructure which span even these different requirements. And that's all. Thank you.